How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Advanced Protocols. Today, we're going to be talking about the how to with top sets and back down sets. How can we structure them in such a way as to help you reach your goals in powerlifting or strength training in general? So, we're going to be tackling a whole bunch of aspects and how we can manipulate all the variables that comes along in our training to make sure that we are utilizing the best methods to help us progress. So let's dive straight into it. Okay, so let's jump straight into how we can structure top sets and back down sets. And we're not going to run through every possible option just because there are way too many to think of. And honestly, the possibilities are somewhat endless. So I'm going to look at some of the more popular ones that are pretty much generally used across myself and all my athletes. There are other ones that can be considered, but very, very infrequently used. So I'm going to run through the main ones that we can utilize in our own training or anyone that you are programming for. So first and foremost, we need to understand that every set that we do where we have some sort of estimated 1 rep max in mind, we've got 3 variables that we work with. 2 of them are given and 1 is going to be omitted, right? And that's going to be where training itself is going to expose what that third one is. So in layman's terms, we've got reps, we've got the percentage or load on the bar, and we've got the RPE. 2 of these need to be given for us to have some sort of idea of what we're going to do in the gym. Okay. Usually we've got a percentage and reps given, or an RPE and reps given. I will go through those ones, but typically we need 2 out of the 3 to get going, and the third one will expose itself. So, for example, okay, say we have 5 reps with 80%. Okay, that's 2 of the variables. We can do that. We have a certain amount of weight on the bar, 80%. We do that for 5 reps, and the RPE will expose itself. Okay, or we can do 5 reps and RPE 6. Okay, so in this case, we kind of formulate our own weight on the bar. So we go, okay, I need to do 5 reps at an RPE 6. That's roughly a 9 rep max, okay, in theory. And so we kind of figure out, okay, what do I think I can do for 9 reps as a max out set or AMRAP? And we kind of think of a weight on the bar, and that's going to be the load on the bar here. That's going to expose itself, right? And then we can do the other 2 as well, which we'll tackle. But we can do 80% for an RPE 7. And then the reps will reveal itself as we're busy doing the set with this amount of weight on the bar. As we go from rep to rep, eventually we'll come to the point where we're like, okay, we've got roughly 3 reps left in the tank. Let's stop here. And when we stop, we know we've gotten a certain amount of reps out of that set. Okay, so let's start off with the first avenue that we can go into in our training. And this will be reps and percentage. The more Western style, the more basic, like if you look at any sort of old programming or even new programming, very general programming, it will be percentage for a given amount of reps. So a good example here could be something like 80% for 5 reps. Now, we're not really going to go into like sets and things like that. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later for one of the aspects, but just per set variables that we're using here. So we can do 80% for 5, we can do 75% for 6, whatever. So very, very general way to go about it, and progressing from week to week, it can maybe look something like, I don't know, 70% for 6, 75% for 6, 80% for 5, 85% for 5, something like that. There's very arbitrary numbers, but you know what I mean. So Very, very general way to do that. And then the RPE will reveal itself. So the only thing about this strategy is we can't really manage our intensity. It's a very static variable, right? So a percentage on the bar, there's nothing much we can do about it. If we don't feel great on the day, it's going to be a high intensity or higher RPE than we might want, and not really good way to manage, but very, very appropriate in certain circumstances, just like every other concept that we'll discuss here, right? Next up, so that was a very simple one, very basic one. Next up, we'll look at reps and RPE. A little bit of a more new age style to do it. You'll see most kind of new age coaches utilize this method. They're not really a big fan of percentages for some reason. And so for them, they'll go with, say, RPE 7, 6 reps. And then maybe there's a better way that I can do this. Let's just say 1 set of 6 RPE 7. And then every week we can go 1 set of 6 RPE 8, and then maybe 1 set of 5 RPE 7, 1 set of 5 RPE 8, what have you, carry on like that. So of course we can do it many different ways and manipulate reps and RPE and whatnot, but typically, okay, in this case, what we're doing is we're giving full control to the intuition of the athlete. So when you step in the gym, you've got a rep range to hit, and you go based on the RPE, what is it that I'm going to load up on the bar based on how I feel today? And usually through warm-up sets, you can kind of tell what you'll be capable of doing depending on how advanced you are. So that is a key aspect, is RPE is a very difficult thing to judge for the most part, especially when we're getting to lower rep ranges. So if we're doing doubles or singles at an RPE 8 or whatever, let me add that in here as well, it can be very difficult, especially lower RPEs with lower rep ranges. If we go an RPE 6 double, I mean, goodness, how are we supposed to know from only doing 2 reps or even 1 rep, how many reps we have left in the tank? Can be very difficult to judge and determine as we're warming up how much weight to use on the bar. So definitely drawbacks here. And another drawback possibly is if the lifter is not too driven to make week-to-week progress. It's probably a very bad way to put it. But if a lifter is generally of a more conservative mindset when it comes to training, definitely not the ideal way to program, just because the lifter might have a tendency to kind of be like, okay, I think I can do this amount of weight on the bar. And then it ends up being maybe somewhat casual or conservative. And the lifter might even look at, say, footage of the training or the set and be like, yeah, that was an RPE 8. And you send that to the coach and it's like, I don't know what you feel under the bar, but I'm telling you, you had more than 2 reps left in the tank if you had a gun to your head. Because that's what RPE really is, right? Gun to your head, how much can you do? So not necessarily the best way to go about it. Again, all of these methods have their drawbacks, but some instances where it can work really well is if a lifter has fluctuations in their performance from week to week. Maybe there are some life stresses that come into play that kind of is up and down from week to week, not a very consistent life stressor. And this can cause somewhat more general physical stress on the body and can fluctuate from week to week, which will obviously influence our performance, right? So we need to be aware that training might not look the same from week to week. And in that case, it can be difficult to stick to a consistent kind of modality of training like percentages would be. So that's a good time to use RPE. Another good time to use RPE is when we have a new or kind of low specificity variation. So for example, if an athlete has never done safety bar squats, it can be a good idea to utilize RPE because that person just does not know what they are capable of. And so giving a estimated 1 rep max. So here's the thing. It's not the percentage that's the issue. It's the estimated 1 rep max that is, because how do we know? How do we know what this lifter can do if he or she has never done it before? That's a good time to use it. Maybe a low specificity variation, something like a bulkless deficit RDL for the deadlift. How on earth are we supposed to manipulate all these variables and kind of calculate everything to know what this person is able to do, especially if it's not something that they've done consistently over time and gotten a pretty good idea of an estimated 1 rep max? So something like that, great idea for RPE. Okay. Then a much more unconventional way to go about it, which I don't think I've ever seen, ever, in programming, is percentage and RPE. So the rep range isn't given. In this case, I love this method because sometimes the load on the bar and the intensity that we're working with, the relative intensity, is significantly more important or of higher priority than how many reps we're getting in. I mean, given a certain percentage, we can gauge roughly how many reps. I mean, it won't be as significant as, say, the percentage given will be probably around 5 or 6 reps for a given RPE. I mean, it's not like the athlete's going to struggle to do 2 reps or get away with doing 10 reps. The margin for like differentiation in the rep range is really not going to be that significant unless they're having a really bad day or a really good day. But again, still, it probably won't be significant at all. So definitely not something to be concerned about when using this method. We can do 80% for an RPE7, and that can work perfectly fine. I mean, the rep range there, particularly here, would probably sit around 4 to 6. Okay, and definitely won't deviate much from that. Pretty guaranteed that an athlete who does this for any given lift, it would either be 4, 5, or 6 reps, hardly 3, hardly 7. So very, very nice way, and a great way or great time to utilize this would be when those two aspects or variables are of high priority. So percentage, okay, typically, if we were to do something, here's a good example, something like block pulls, okay, because we've got shortened range of motion and the technical specificity is also not too high, okay. The only other possible reason that we can do this or need to do this is for load exposure. And so giving a very particular percentage where we know we want the athlete to experience a certain amount of load on the bar to make some adaptations that are relative to whatever training modality they are busy with. This is going to be a great way. We've got the percentage, we need the percentage, that's high priority, but we also need to manage the relative intensity. We don't want them failing any reps, and possibly we want to manage fatigue, especially for a variation like this, okay? Given the fact that this is not a main deadlift or primary deadlift in, say, a week's worth of training, it's probably a secondary lift, a secondary variation to the deadlift. And so we definitely need to manage what the fatigue is going to be like coming from this so that we are still fresh and good to go on a primary day. So if this is on a secondary day, we definitely want to make sure that that RPE is not too high or possibly too low, because that might just mean that there's not enough stimulus, especially if load is important, because I mean, we can use static load for a given lift to have load exposure, but we need high RPE for load exposure to actually be do its job, right? So we need that sort of stimulus. And so this is where this sort of method is going to be very, very important, because honestly, the reps in this case, the kind of situation that I've just described now, the rep range is really not that important. It's more the load exposure and managing the intensity. So you can be exceptionally creative with this method and give it a go. We're going to talk about backdowns and things like that, but yeah, we're going to talk about that specifically in this little avenue. So we'll get there. Let's actually do that now first before we tackle the next one. So here's a good example, right? Say we've got a top set percentage. We're just doing a very particular number. Now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize this method for the backdowns, and we're going to go, okay, let's say this exact thing, right? We've got 80% for an RPE 7 on the block pull. Okay, let's make a insertion here. Move this. Good. Okay, so this is what we have got in our training. And what's going to be great here is we might have something like 4 sets, right? So set number 1 might be 6 reps, okay? Given that as sets go on, fatigue starts to kick in and workload becomes harder given the same variables, we can start off with, say, 6 reps. It's a little bit generous, but if the athlete gets it, great. So let's start with 6 reps for the first set. We don't want to drop load because we need the load exposure. We don't want to sort of increase the RPE by keeping the rep range the same, right? So because that will happen if we're doing the same percentage on the bar for the same amount of reps each set. Okay, fatigue is going to cause something. So in that case, it will be an increased RPE. But again, we might need to manage the RPE and keep it static at, say, 7. And so your next set might be 5 reps. The set after that might be another 5 reps, and the last set 4. Okay, very, very kind of high probability for something like this to happen in this situation, right? And so look at what we've got here. Okay, we've got a set of 6, 5, 5, and then 4. We're very well in the kind of rep range that's going to be appropriate for the kind of training that this person might be doing. We kept the percentage the same. We kept the RPE the same. This looks absolutely fantastic, right? We've got a deviation in reps, but it's still within a very decent range. If the lifter, for example, the third set is, say, 4 reps and the last set is, say, 2, okay, that calls for other things to change, because yes, we would want to change that, right? That doesn't seem like a very consistent progression or regression, actually, in a intra-session kind of exposure or stimulus. So in this case, we can't look at this and go, okay, well, clearly this methodology doesn't work, let's try something else. Rather, we can look at it and go, okay, well, maybe by the 4th set, this person is so fatigued, this might be too much volume intra-session or within one session. And so we can pretty much just take away the last set then, given that the fatigue drops or the fatigue increases so much and the performance drops by that last set. And so we can manage volume throughout the week with this kind of change by adding, say, that extra set somewhere else in the week, or maybe doing it on a different variation, or maybe dropping the total percentage and seeing how the little bit of drop in load, depending on what the load exposure goal is here. But there are many ways to change these things without influencing this methodology, because this methodology is absolutely fantastic to use in various different scopes. So give this one a go. It's going to be great. It's probably going to be a little bit of a life changer. What's really nice about this also is we kind of get to stick to, we kind of adapt our mindset as well to a given load. If there's a certain amount of weight on the bar that's a little bit scary or intimidating, this is a great way to kind of ease your mind with it, and to get that sort of like technical adaptations from high loads, because as we know, technical demand is only as high as the load is that's appropriate for it. So if we're working with 50% on the bar or 60%, it's not a lot of technical demand, because the margin for error is so great that we can get away with bad technique, is a better way to put it. And so not the best time to, or not the most technical demand, so we wouldn't really need to dial in our technique very well. And so having this sort of methodology, we get exposed to a particular amount of load, and so doing the set after set after set, instead of dropping load from set to set, which in most cases are the way people do it. Instead of doing that, we keep the load on the bar and we experience that load consistently for multiple sets. Okay, So enough about that. Let's move on to the next one, is the top set RPE and what we do after that. So if we do say an RPE set as our top set, and that can be with reps or with a percentage, doesn't really matter in this case based on what we're going to talk about, but let's look at what the back downs look like. So very important note, we don't need more, or let me put it like this, we only need one set per lift, just one set per lift to know, as an RPE set, to know what we are feeling like on the day. Okay, if you warm up and do a top set of RPE 8, let's say a single or a triple or set of 5, whatever, it takes that one set to know how are we feeling today, what are we going to be able to do, etc., etc. So we don't need a top set at RPE 7 and 3 back down sets at RPE 8. It's genuinely not necessary. So the best way to go about it, in my opinion, is to go top set RPE and then back down percentage. Okay, and this can be a static or strict percentage if we need some sort of load exposure where we go, okay, we want to work with a particular amount of load and increase that every week, given that it's low enough RPE where changes in RPE or increased RPE or differentiation of RPE within the session to session, it's not going to be so significant that we might run into problems like RPE 10 sets or failing reps. Okay, so a good thing here would probably be 70% for sets of 5, right? Okay, I mean, if you're doing 5 reps on 70% and you somewhere close to an RPE 9 or 10, your estimate's wrong. So given that the RPE will typically be very low here, we can use static percentages because we're not really too worried about what the intensity is going to peak at. So nice way there. But for the most part, what I like to use is one where the load for the top set determines the percentage that we're working with. So very, very nice way to go about doing this is say we have a top set of 5 at an RPE 8. Okay, now we go, okay, instead of going 3 sets of 5 for an RPE 7 for our back downs, for example, we only need that top set's RPE to determine how we're feeling on the day. So instead of doing this way, okay, which can be something to look at, we'll look at how this is appropriate. But for the most part, we don't need to do that. We can go 3 sets of 5 with, say, for example, 95% of top set. Okay, that's usually how I put it in a program. 95% of top set, or 94%, or 96%, or however you calculate how much weight you would want to use based on what you got for your top set. This is going to be a nice way to go about it, because now we go, okay, based on how much weight we used, say we used 200 kilos over here, okay, 95% of that would be 190 kilos, okay? So, and we do that for the back down set. So in this, with this method, what we're actually doing is we're going, okay, with the top set, we know how much we can handle and what we're capable of in the day, and we're throwing in some sort of calculated approach as to what's going to be the rest of our training, right? Instead of just throwing our intuition into every aspect of training where we're like, every set that we do, I can basically pick whatever the hell I want to do for my set. It kind of takes the, I want to say, the margin for error in this concept, because it's like the more sets that's up to us to choose what we want to have on the bar, the more margin for error there is, the more we kind of open the door for error, right? So very much more strict, better way, in my opinion, to go about doing it is have a percentage of the top set, because we know how we're feeling on the day after just that one set, right? So that's one option. You can do back downs at an RPE 7 or RPE 8 or whatever you want to do. The times when this might be appropriate is when we don't know the fatigue drop from set to set for a particular athlete. I have one athlete where after two sets of bench, it's like the weight on the bar significantly goes down. He just gets very good stimulus, but very high fatigue going from set to set. So in this case, this might be a little bit more appropriate because we need to stick to that RPE and the load might have to come down a lot. Again, probably a better way, if we're working with low rep ranges, say this was 3 sets of 3 at RP8, that would be appropriate where the load on the bar is adjustable for the athlete. But say we had 3 sets of, say, 7 reps at an RPE8, okay? In this case, with that rep range, it would probably be better to be like 3 sets of, say, for example, 70% at an RPE8. Again, now we're using this different methodology here where we've got the percentage in the RPE. Because in this case, we have the same weight on the bar, we have the same RPE, and with every set, the reps will probably drop significantly. Because of the fatigue that increases so much from set to set, the reps will probably go down a lot. But because the rep range is so high, there's leeway for that. It's okay if you end up with 3 reps for your last set. So if the fatigue goes up a lot from set to set, this might be a good way to go about managing back down sets, right? So very, very nice structure as well. Then let's move on to other things. For example, we can have back down sets that turn into top sets. So our first week can be 1 top set of 5 with 3 back down sets of 5. And every week we add a top set and decrease a back down set. Week 2, 2 sets of 5 for our top set, 2 sets of 5 for our back downs. And again, the definition of top set and back downs is pretty much based on RPE and percentage used, or like the most difficult work to do. So the only difference between these two would be those variables, right? So you might look on this and be like, well, that's exactly the same thing. I mean, it can be the same thing, but if we're utilizing different percentages or RPEs, it probably won't be. So we're making it more intense week to week by adding top sets and decreasing back downs. So then we might end up with 3 top sets and 1 back down, and eventually get to 4 top sets with no back downs. Okay, volume stays the same pretty much, but the intensity increases because the weight we use for our top set might be more than the back downs, most probably, or the RPE. And so we're definitely increasing intensity by utilizing this method. Not a big fan of this, maybe more for volume blocks where we want to increase work capacity and kind of push the limits of how much fatigue you can work through, especially with people that have high fatigue drops, where they gain a lot of fatigue from set to set, intra-session within a session. And so we're pushing those limits and kind of forcing them to experience more workload with heavier weight and kind of battle that fatigue. Another word for, or another phrase for work capacity is fatigue tolerance, right? So very, very nice way to do that, although don't really use it all that often. It can be very tricky to program if you're not really good with your numbers. So yeah, next one is the top set variation. A little bit interesting here. So I mean, we're not gonna talk about accessories at all here. We're basically just talking about main lifts and variations, and now we're kicking off with the variations, right? So very, very cool way to do this is we've got, say, we're going to use pause squats for the variation examples. So say we have a pause squat single and our back downs are comp squat. Okay. Very, very nice way to utilize a top set, because what we're doing now is we're allowing our top set to really be driven towards our main goal in terms of weakness improvements, right? So if we really struggle out the hole, instead of having pause squats as your kind of back down work or on secondary day or whatever, this is really nice because now we are hammering and we're taking all of our hype and aggression, whatever you use to get yourself to lift the most amount of weight, we're using all of that energy towards this weak point, which is, in this case, out the hole of the squat, and really putting the focus on doing that for our top set, right? So we do that for our top set, say a big single, we get a whole lot of exposure and demand out the hole, and now we do a whole bunch of comp squat back downs just to get the skill practice in, obviously drive some strength progression and possibly some hypertrophy depending. But the main focus is that variation. I love to use this. What's really nice as well in using this is we get a little bit better exposure. So a lot of times what happens is even as we warm up, we might feel iffy out the hole. And possibly when the sets get heavier, the warm-up sets get heavier and heavier, it might feel worse and worse. But if we're warming up with the intention of getting work done in that weak point area, in the hole of the squat in this example, we work up to a top set, we get a lot of demand there, a lot of exposure to the load that we're using. And now we actually might be priming our comp squat technique as we do our back downs. So in essence, our back downs in this situation might be a lot better, a lot smoother. The technique might feel a lot better because we've had this kind of exposure as our top set. Now, in cases that I'm not too fond of, I mean, obviously we won't be going like a safety bar squat for our top set and then comp squat for our back downs. That would be silly because it's a positional variation. Okay, we would literally need to change positions and possibly re-warm up just to be able to do these back down squats comfortably. Definitely, objectively, a stupid thing to do. I would never do this. So we're not utilizing positional variations, pretty much only variations, not even range of motion variations where we alter the range of motion. Pretty much only variations where we kind of managing the tempo. So tempo lifts, pause lifts, anywhere within the lift. Yeah, that's about it. You can do pauses in many places for any lift. Eccentric lifts, which is similar to a tempo, but maybe not entirely the same. Zero acceleration, also very similar, but not entirely. So definitely anything that's got to do with time under the bar. That's when we want to utilize this method, not really anything else. So let me move my face here. So that's a really nice thing I like to do. And then to take it even further, we can utilize both of these. But to take it even further, we can have, say, a set of 3 reps on the squat and have that first rep be paused. Again, now we've got a little bit more direct translation. So instead of doing a top set, paused, resting for a while, get under the bar again, and then kind of get those sort of like exposure translation going into the next or into the back down sets where we feel more comfortable at the hole now, and then do our back down sets normal. In this case, what we're doing is we're taking a normal squat set, and within the set, our first rep is paused. We get that exposure, we get more confident and comfortable out the hole, and now the last 2 reps of that triple is going to move probably a lot smoother than it would have in the first place. So very, very nice way to go about it, and you can do both. You can do a top set paused, and then your first back down will be first rep paused, and then say you've got 2 back down triples, comp, squat. I've utilized this once or twice. Very, very nice. Not entirely always necessary unless someone really struggles with a particular position, but definitely a very nice and kind of interesting way to go about getting more confident, more power, more exposure in a given position that is considered a weak point for you or for whatever athlete you're working with. So very, very nice way. I'm going to wrap this up. This is basically all the general ones that I use. There are more intricate ones, definitely not worth mentioning because you can be creative and figure it out. The possibilities are pretty endless. So it really depends on the athlete. It really depends on who you're working with, what the kind of situation is. But you can be creative, honestly. I mean, even this new or potentially new kind of methodology where we have percentage and RPE and no rep range, you can do so much. It's ridiculous. You just need to know the athlete. You need to know the kind of methodologies. Methodologies? Why am I saying that funny? Anyway, that are available. And you can think of some interesting things yourself. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'm not going to drag it out too long. Hope you enjoyed it. And this is another one of our advanced protocol sessions. And so there's going to be a couple more that we're going to dive into. But if you haven't yet, please like, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.